On the night of February 23, 2026, the eve of the 4th anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion, Vladimir Putin sent a message. Not in words, not at the negotiating table in Abu Dhabi, but in steel, explosives, and fire. 133 attack drones, screaming across the dark Ukrainian sky. And Putin was betting that Ukraine was finally too exhausted to stop them. He was wrong. Almost. To understand why this attack happened exactly when it did, you need to rewind the clock. Not by days, but by weeks. Because this wasn't a random strike. This was deliberate. This was calculated. And the timing tells you everything about what Putin is really after. 6 p.m., February 23, 2026, the first wave appears on radar. Ukrainian air defense radar networks, a patchwork of Soviet-era systems, upgraded with Western technology, began picking up the signatures. Drones lifting off from multiple directions simultaneously. The attack wasn't coming from one place. Russia had learned to be deceptive. Launch points were confirmed across 5 vectors: Oriel, Kursk and Bryansk oblasts in Russia to the north, Primorsko-Akht, Tarsk, and Milarovo from the east, and from Gevordaysky and Chaudy in occupied Crimea to the south. This is a hallmark of Russian drone doctrine. Saturate the radar picture from multiple angles, so air defense commanders coup and focus in one direction. You split their attention, you split their missiles, you try to overwhelm the system. 133 UAVs, plus 1 Iskander-M ballistic missile screaming in from occupied Crimea. Ukraine's Air Force Command issued the alert. Sirens wailed across the country. Civilians rushed to bomb shelters, and key U.S. metro stations the same. Underground corridors that have served as refuge dozens of times in the past 4 years. 4 years. 4 brutal, bloody years. On February 24, 2022, Russia launched the largest land invasion in Europe since World War II. Putin told the world it would take 72 hours. He was wrong by approximately 1,460 days and counting. But by February 2026, the war had reached a strange, dangerous new phase. Diplomatic talks had begun. Trilateral negotiations between the United States, Ukraine, and Russia, hosted in Abu Dhabi, UAE. On the surface, it looked like the world might be inching toward peace. On the surface, behind the scenes, Russia was doing something far more sinister. Intelligence analysts and Ukrainian officials, including President Zelensky himself, accused Moscow of using the ceasefire window, a brief U.S. brokered pause in energy strikes not to show goodwill, but to stockpile missiles and WAIT for the coldest days of winter. That accusation would prove devastatingly accurate. In the first 3 weeks of February 2026 alone, Russia launched over 1,300 drones, more than 1,400 guided aerial bombs, and 96 missiles at Ukraine. The attacks hammered energy infrastructure, power plants, heating facilities, electrical substations, during a brutal cold snap where temperatures dropped below -10 degrees Celsius. In Kyiv alone, one attack left 100,000 families without electricity and 500 apartment buildings without heat. Children were sleeping in coats. Hospitals were running on generators. And the Kremlin was calling itself a peace partner. And then came the night of February 23rd, the anniversary eve. One final message before the world paused to remember the war Russia started. 6:30 p.m., the drone composition becomes clear. Intelligence units began profiling the incoming swarm. What emerged was a sophisticated, multi-layered weapons package. Approximately 90 of the 133 drones were Shaheds, the Iranian-designed, Russian-manufactured kamikaze drones that have become the workhorses of Russia's air terror campaign. Each Shahed 136, which Russia calls the Gerent 2, carries roughly 50 kilograms of explosives and has a range exceeding 2,000 kilometers. They fly low and slow, hugging terrain which makes them difficult for radar to track. They reach cheap estimated at around $20,000 to $50,000 per unit, which means Russia can afford to throw them at Ukraine in large numbers and accept losses. But mixed into the swarm were also Gerbera drones, a newer domestically produced Russian UAV, and Atalma's variants. This was a deliberate mix. Different speeds, different radar cross-sections, different flight profiles, each one designed to complicate the air defense picture. The Iskander ballistic missile was in a category of its own. Launched from Crimea, it travels at hypersonic speeds up to Mach 7 and follows a ballistic arc that gives defenders mere minutes to respond.
Nice.
It's designed to hit high-value targets with precision. Its arrival alongside the drone swarm was designed to split Ukraine's air defense resources at the most critical moment. Ukraine's commanders faced a decision: where do you point your limited number of missiles? 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. the hunt begins. Ukraine's air defense is not a single system. It's a complex, layered network that has been built and rebuilt under fire over 4 years of war. And by 2026, it had become something remarkable. At the top of the kill chain sat Western-supplied systems Patriot PAC-3 batteries, which can engage ballistic missiles like the Iskander. HARDdf SLM systems provided medium-range coverage. NASAMS and French SAMP-T systems covered mid-altitude threats. And beneath all of that, hundreds of mobile fire groups, soldiers with Stingers, Zu-23 autocannons, and improvised vehicle-mounted weapons hunted drones in the altitude envelope. Ukraine also had something that no textbook air defense playbook fully accounts for: electronic warfare. EW units broadcast jamming signals designed to confuse shade navigation systems, forcing drones off course, causing them to spiral into empty fields, or simply cutting their data links entirely. When a drone is jammed, it doesn't necessarily explode, it suppresses, which is why the Ukrainian Air Force reports both shot down and suppressed numbers. The hunt was on. All across the northern, southern, and eastern approaches, Ukrainian defenders, aviation units, missile batteries, U teams, and mobile fire groups began engaging the swarm. Midnight, the battle reaches its peak. For 6 hours, Ukraine's sky was a battlefield. Across the country, interceptor jets from Ukraine's Air Force took to the darkness. Using radar and infrared sensors to stalk Shaheeds from above and behind, the safest angle to engage a kamikaze drone. Ground-based missile crews tracked swarms on radar and fired carefully, conserving expensive interceptor missiles while mobile groups handled slower threats with guns and short-range missiles. The Iskander was the most dangerous single projectile of the night. Its ballistic trajectory gave defenders perhaps 3 to 5 minutes of warning. Ukraine's Patriot batteries, precious, limited, absolutely critical assets engaged. The missile's fate wasn't immediately confirmed in official reports. And then there were the 22 drones, the ones that got through, or rather, the ones that couldn't be stopped. It's not for lack of effort, but because in a swarm of 133, in a country the size of France, with limited ammunition and infinite threat vectors, some things slip through. That's the grim mathematics of modern air defense. The 3 a.m. fires and damage reports began coming in. The morning darkness lit up in the wrong places. Reports began flooding into regional military administrations. Hits were recorded at 16 separate locations across Ukraine: the north, the south, the east. Railway infrastructure in the Sumy region was struck, causing fires. Infrastructure in the Konotop district was damaged. Across the country, debris from downed drones, in some cases weighing hundreds of kilograms, fell on residential areas, causing damage even in successful intercept zones. Emergency crews scrambled. Firefighters in orange suits worked under the glow of their own trucks. In Sumy, a region that has endured relentless punishment throughout the war, residents, who had already been awake in shelters, watched smoke rise from the railway yards. 19 strike UAVs hit their targets. 1 missile impact was recorded. At one location, fragments from a downed drone caused additional damage. These numbers are cold and clinical, but each one represents a place where someone's home, workplace, or community infrastructure was damaged or destroyed. 8:30 a.m., February 24th, official numbers. Released Ukraine's Air Force Command released the preliminary official report. 133 attack UAVs launched, 111 shot down or suppressed. That's an 83.5% intercept rate. On any other day, against any other adversary, an 83% intercept rate would be celebrated as a remarkable defensive achievement. And it is remarkable. By the standards of modern air defense against mass drone attacks, Ukraine's performance on the night of February 23rd to 24th was genuinely extraordinary. But the remaining 22 drones, the ones that slipped through, were enough to cause real damage, real suffering, That's the cold, brutal logic of Russia's drone strategy. If you fire enough of them, some will always get through. The attack continues, the Air Force warned. Several enemy UAVs remain in the airspace. Follow safety rules. Together to victory. The timing of this attack was not accidental. It was deliberate on multiple levels, and understanding those levels reveals a great deal about Russian strategy in 2026. Reason 1. The anniversary provocation, February 24th, is the anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion. Attacking on the eve of that date is psychologically calculated. Putin wanted Ukrainians to wake up on the 4th anniversary of the war, not with defiance, but with fear, with darkness. With the smell of smoke, the attack was designed to demoralize, to remind Ukraine that after 4 years, Russia is still capable of raining fire. Reason 2. Diplomatic sabotage. Peace talks were actively ongoing. Trilateral U.S.-Ukraine-Russia negotiations in Abu Dhabi had just concluded their latest round. A new round was being planned, potentially in Miami. By launching a mass drone attack during this period, Russia was sending a message to the world. The Kremlin does not take diplomacy seriously. Every such strike by Russia confirms that the attitude in Moscow has not changed, Zelensky said. They are still counting on war. This is consistent with a broader pattern. Russia launched a massive strike on the first day of the Geneva talks earlier in February. Nearly 400 drones and 29 missiles. The message was unmistakable. We are at the table, but we are still hitting you. Reason 3. Winter as a weapon. Russia's energy infrastructure targeting strategy in winter 2026 was brutal in its simplicity. Hit the power plants and heating systems when people need them most. Force Ukrainians to choose between freezing and surrendering. This attack was part of that campaign. Zelensky said it clearly. Taking advantage of the coldest days of winter to terrorize people is more important to Russia than resorting to diplomacy. Reason 4. Testing and adapting. Each mass drone attack also serves a tactical intelligence function. Russia studies which areas Ukraine defends most heavily, which approach vectors suffer the most drone losses, where electronic warfare is strongest. Where mobile fire groups are deployed, every attack is simultaneously an assault and an intelligence-gathering operation. Russia uses this data to refine the next attack. When Russia launched its invasion in February 2022, Ukraine's air defenses were largely Soviet-era relics. S-300 batteries, Puk systems, aging radar networks. Military analysts widely expected them to be overrun within days. What followed was one of the most remarkable defensive adaptations in modern military history. By 2026, Ukraine operated a hybrid air defense architecture that combined Western long-range systems. Patriot PAC-3 for ballistic missile defense. SAMP from France and Italy, and HARDdf from Germany, all capable of engaging cruise missiles and ballistic threats at range. Medium-range coverage. NASAMS from the United States and Norway, Hawk systems. And upgraded Soviet Buchem-1 and S-300 batteries provided the critical middle layer of the defensive envelope, electronic warfare integration. Ukraine's EW capability grew dramatically. Jamming systems capable of disrupting satellite navigation and command links became a key force multiplier, allowing Ukraine to neutralize drones without expending expensive interceptor missiles. The kill chain innovation, perhaps most significantly, Ukraine developed a distributed, networked kill chain that integrated radar data, drone pilot reports, civilian drone watching apps, and military intelligence into a real-time air picture. Ordinary Ukrainians used apps to report drone sightings, feeding data into a system that helped commanders make split-second intercept decisions. Ukraine's newest weapon, a laser defense system, in February 2026. Ukraine announced it was developing a low-cost laser air defense system specifically designed to counter Russian drones. The system represents a potential revolution in drone defense economics. But here's the painful truth that Ukraine's defenders live with every night. Even with all of this, you cannot achieve 100%. Not when the enemy fires 133 drones from 5 directions at once. Not when they mix slow Shaheads with faster Gerberas. Not when they add a hypersonic ballistic missile to split your attention. At some point, the math favors the attacker. And that's why 22 drones still got through. Let's talk about what this attack cost Russia. Because the Kremlin sells these strikes as demonstrations of overwhelming power. But the numbers tell a different story. Russia launched 133 drones at an average cost estimate of between $20,000 and $50,000 each. Using conservative figures, that's a minimum of $2.6 million in hardware. Add the Iskandera missile, a weapon that costs approximately $3 million per unit, and Russia spent somewhere between $5 million and $10 million on this single night attack. 111 of those drones were destroyed. Russia got nothing for that hardware. Nothing. Evaporated in Ukrainian airspace, shot down by interceptors, jammed into the ground, or blasted apart by mobile fire groups. Meanwhile, on the same night Ukraine launched this defensive operation, Ukrainian drone forces struck back. They destroyed a Hurricane MLR's multiple rocket launcher system, a Buchem-1 surface-to-air missile system, a piece of hardware worth tens of millions of dollars, and a Panzer S-1 air defense gun missile system, also an enormously expensive piece of equipment. The Buchem-1 alone is estimated to cost over $75 million per battery. Ukraine was striking Russian air defense systems with the same weapons Russia was using to attack Ukrainian cities. The symmetry was devastating, and at the strategic level, Russia's cumulative losses continued to pile up. By early 2026, Russia had lost well over 800,000 soldiers killed, wounded, captured, or missing, according to Ukrainian military estimates. Figures that Western intelligence agencies broadly consider credible, if not slightly underestimated. Equipment losses included thousands of tanks, armored vehicles, aircraft, and artillery systems. Russia was spending blood and treasure at a rate that was straining even its massive defense industrial base. And it was trading $5 million drone attacks for 83%. Intercept rates and the destruction of its own air defense equipment in return strikes. The attack of February 23 to 24, 2026 didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened at one of the most pivotal, dangerous, and uncertain moments of the entire war. Peace talks were ongoing. But Russia's behavior at those talks, launching massive strikes on the first day of Geneva negotiations, bombing energy infrastructure during the coldest days of winter, sending 133 drones on the anniversary eve suggested that Moscow was not negotiating in good faith. It was playing a double game, maintaining the appearance of diplomacy while continuing to apply maximum military pressure on Ukraine. The United States, under President Donald Trump, was actively pushing for a ceasefire. Trump had proposed a pause in energy strikes, which Russia agreed to briefly, and then used to stockpile weapons before resuming attacks when temperatures peaked cold. The U.S. was also proposing continued trilateral talks, potentially in Miami. Ukraine was caught in an excruciating position. Zelensky could not stop fighting. To do so would be to concede territory and potentially invite a larger Russian offensive. But the peace talks offered at least the possibility of relief. Each massive drone attack made it harder for Ukraine's leadership to justify continued negotiations to an exhausted, suffering public. At the same time, a core sticking point in negotiations remained unresolved and probably unresolvable in the short term. Russia demanded Ukraine withdraw from the roughly 20% of Donetsk it still controls. Ukraine categorically refused. There was no obvious bridge between those positions. Meanwhile, more actively using light armor in the Kupiansk direction. Russian forces were attempting to adapt tactically on the ground using MTLBs, quad bikes, and motorcycles and infantry assaults to reduce the visibility signature that Ukrainian drones could lock onto. In Stepnogorsk, in the Zaporizhia direction, Russian soldiers were reportedly using backpacks filled with TNT to demolish entire apartment building entrances, acts of deliberate, calculated destruction that went far beyond military necessity. The war was not ending. It was evolving, grinding, adapting, finding new and terrible ways to inflict suffering. Statistics can numb you. 133 drones. 111 shot down. 22 got through. Hits at 16 locations. These numbers start to sound like a sports scoreboard after a while. So let's stop for a moment and talk about what they actually mean. It means that on the night of February 23, 2026, somewhere in Ukraine, in Sumy, in the north, in the south, in the east, somebody's grandmother was in a bomb shelter instead of her bed. Somebody's child asked why the sirens keep going off. Somebody's father couldn't heat his home. Somebody's workplace was burning at 3 in the morning. It means that Ukrainian air defense soldiers, the ones manning the Patriot batteries, The ones driving the mobile fire groups in pickup trucks with ZU-3 guns mounted in the back? The ones sitting in cramped EW vehicles flooding the electromagnetic spectrum with jamming signals were doing their jobs in the dark. Under extraordinary pressure, knowing that every drone they failed to stop was going to fall on somebody. It means 4 years of this. For years of sirens and shelters and power cuts and fires. For years of a population that has been tested in ways that most people in the world cannot imagine and has refused to break. The 83.5% intercept rate on February 23rd to 24th is a military statistic, but it is also a human achievement of the highest order. So where does this go from here? There are essentially 3 scenarios playing out simultaneously, and right now it's impossible to know which one will define the next chapter of this war. Scenario 1. Escalation continues. Russia maintains its strategy of maximum pressure, massive drone and missile attacks combined, with relentless ground assaults, betting that Ukraine's air defenses will eventually be depleted, its civilian population exhausted, and its Western backers politically unwilling to sustain support indefinitely. In this scenario, the drone attacks grow larger, not smaller. Russia pushes its domestic drone production to even higher numbers and keeps firing until something breaks. Scenario 2. A frozen ceasefire. U.S. diplomatic pressure achieves a ceasefire along current front lines. Freezing the war in place without resolving its underlying causes, Russia keeps occupied territory. Ukraine keeps its remaining land. Both sides claim a form of victory. Neither side is satisfied. The risk in this scenario is that it becomes a pause rather than a peace, a chance for Russia to regroup and rearm for round 2. Scenario 3. The turning point. Ukraine's new technologies, laser air defense systems, improved drone capabilities, long-range strike weapons begin to fundamentally shift the cost-benefit equation. Russia's drone campaign becomes so expensive and so ineffective that it loses its strategic value. Simultaneously, international pressure mounts on Moscow to negotiate seriously. In this scenario, the attack of February 23rd to 24th is not remembered as another night of Russian terror, but as one of the last nights before things changed. Which scenario unfolds depends on factors that no analyst, no government, and no military commander can fully predict. It depends on political will in Washington, in Brussels, in Kyiv, and in Moscow. It depends on industrial production rates in Russia, Ukraine, and their respective partner networks. It depends on the decisions made by men and women in command centers and cockpits and electronic warfare vans on dark Ukrainian nights. It depends, above all, on whether the world decides that 4 years of this is enough.
Ow.
On the night of February 23, 2026, the eve of 4 years of invasion, Russia sent 133 drones into the Ukrainian sky. Ukraine shot 111 of them down. That is what 4 years looks like. Not defeat, not victory, but refusal. The stubborn, extraordinary, painful refusal to be broken. Putin sent a message on the anniversary eve. Ukraine sent one back. It was written in radar locks, interceptor trails, and the wreckage of 111 drones scattered across Ukrainian fields in the pre-dawn dark. The war is not over. The drones will keep coming, and Ukraine will keep shooting them down. But here's the question that nobody can fully answer. Not the analysts. Not the generals. Not the diplomats negotiating in Abu Dhabi, or Miami, or wherever the next table is set. How many more nights like February 23rd can this war sustain before something somewhere finally breaks? Is it Russia's economy? Ukraine's air defense stockpile? Western political will? Or is there a ceasefire quietly being negotiated right now that will stop the drones before the next anniversary? That's where we leave it tonight. 133 drones. 111 shot down. A war at its most dangerous crossroads. And a question that the entire world needs to answer. What do you think happens next? Does Ukraine hold the line? Does diplomacy finally break through? Or is the worst of this war still ahead? Drop your answer in the comments below. We read every single one. And if this breakdown opened your eyes, hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to understand what's actually happening in Ukraine. And subscribe so you never miss a breakdown like this one.